Hello everyone. Today I wanted to make a video about casual versus competitive audience preferences in fighting games, going over some of the misconceptions, talking about what really makes a game accessible or interesting or playable for those audiences. I wrote an article about it here, and I thought it'd be fun to kind of make a video going more into my thoughts and then being able to hear yours as well. So the premise of this is essentially there's kind of this binary thinking when it comes to preferences between the competitive scene and then your general casual audience when it comes to fighting games. So it goes something like this: competitive players prefer to play the same character as their opponent, so only one character from the whole roster with no RNG, one stage with no platforms that is completely solitary and static, doesn't move at all, because the more boring it is, the more competitively satisfying it is, right? So that's the characterization of the competitive scene and their preferences. Then you have casual players. They only want crazy stages with random hazards, unpredictable RNG-based characters and moves, with a 90 plus character roster, because the more chaotic and wackier, the more fun. So I would say both characterizations really miss the mark when it comes to understanding the preferences of each audience. So I would say, fighting games at their best showcase a bit of variety and a bit of predictability, right? So in reality, I don't think either group wants just all homogenized, everything's the same, completely predictable. Because that kind of misses the charm of fighting games, especially platform fighting games, which have to do with, reading your opponent and kind of doing your own unique style of combos, right? And having your own style. If everything was the same, then you wouldn't have those things that make platform fighting games, for example, so special. And then on the other side, if you have a stage that's constantly moving and kind of crazy, even your most casual enjoyer is not going to enjoy playing on those stages after a while, right? So I think a good example is Mario Party. So some mini games rely on complete randomness, but they're generally not the most favorite of the games even in Mario Party, and Mario Party is an ultra casual experience by design. Obviously, when it comes to platform fighting games, Smash Brothers is also casually designed, especially the earlier games were casually minded first. But even in situations that are hyper casual, your average player doesn't necessarily want complete chaos and randomness. They want some level of push and pull, as Sakurai would say. Some level of, there's some merit here. There's some skill involved. So anyway, and this also comes through on, for example, a stage choice, right? So if you were to poll people what their favorite stage was, they might say it was Temple, or they might say it was, a stage that's a bit wackier. Temple's just a really big stage. But really, when it comes down to it, I think it'd be a lot more interesting to kind of get some quantitative data around what stages are played the most in Smash Brothers, for example. And I think you'll find the more neutral stage options are by far the most selected, because really you want to focus on the gameplay, and so a neutral stage will help kind of let players play the game more than a more obtrusive stage. And a lot of the comments made on why they don't like certain stages, it's kind of gets in the way, it's too big or whatever. So that's a good example of both casual and competitive audiences appreciating something more grounded and less chaotic. But obviously every once in a while there's certainly a novelty factor to picking Poke Floats, right? And picking, Mute City or something like that. But I think when it comes down to it, the replayability factor is actually the most important beyond, the number of gimmicks or the number of options or the amount of RNG involved. It comes down to how replayable is this experience. And, that's, if you think about Mr. Game & Watch's Side B or Peach's Down special with Turnip Pull, Randall on Yoshi's Story, those all add kind of chaotic elements. Some of them include RNG, Shy Guys, all that, where that kind of helps make the game more exciting. And I would say, if a game can be endlessly replayable, what are the elements to those things? And I would say Brawl's tripping mechanic is not a great example of making the game more replayable. Even casuals, the biggest Brawl fans today still play with a version of the game that's modded to not have tripping in it. So if you had that level of RNG with that level of like chaotic, like you can't turn it off even in base brawl, right? So that was an attempt by Sakurai to kind of throw a bone to the casual side of things and make things less competitive, and no one ended up liking it. So I would say, if you're trying to design a fighting game, you need to consider both the casual and the competitive sides, and you can't really dismiss one or the other. The reason is because like your competitive folks are going to be your biggest advocates. They're going to be sinking the most amount of time in, but they're going to represent a much smaller percentage of your broader audience. The casual side is going to represent the vast majority, right? So you need a good variety of stages, you need a good variety of characters and mechanics to kind of have that novelty factor and, appease the casual market. But then you also need to make sure that your ducks are in a row in terms of having a good replayable experience that'll cater to your competitive scene as well. Because your competitive scene could even get it on a big stage. They could get it in front of other competitive fighting fans. And really, it could increase the longevity of your game. Years, decades even. So anyway, all that to say, I just want to kind of share my thoughts on the kind of casual competitive audience preference discussion, because I think too often certain editions are seen as, oh, this is only good for casual, this is only good for, competitive players. But it's kind of insulting both audiences to say that, one thing is only for one audience and one thing is for another. So anyway, love to hear your thoughts. Do you disagree with me? Was I totally off the mark here? Do you agree with me? Are there points that I missed? I'd love to hear all of it in the comments. I'll see you guys on the next video.